Nectar of Devotion, Chapter 51, Perverted Rasas, Perverted Fellows. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvasesa Sunyavadi Paskachade Satarne Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Manchikalpachubhischa Kipasindabhyabhata Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we are ending our journey through the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And we'd like to acknowledge Bhanu Swami and David Haberman, whose translations of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu we rely on very heavily for this presentation. So the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is the nectar ocean of devotional mellow or relationship. And today we are on, I think it's actually wave, we're on wave 9. We're on wave 9 of the fourth ocean, verses 1 through 43, which is Nectar Devotion, chapter 51. So this is about Rasa Abhasa. And Abhasa is a semblance. It sort of looks like the thing, sort of tastes like the thing, but it's not the thing. Like vegan cheesecake. So an abhas is a shadow or a reflection of rasa. Now the rasa bhasa that's being described here is there's some deficiency in the characteristics of rasa, such as the vibhava, the anubhava, the saibhav, the vyavichari bhav, and the sattvika bhavs. If you think of it, if you're going to make a drink, like a smoothie, and one of the ingredients is a little funny, or a fruit salad. So many years ago when I was in Melbourne, some devotees there who had been born and raised in India were making fruit salads for me, and they were using Australian fruits that they were not familiar with. And many times in the grocery stores, they sell unripe fruits because they ship them unripe and then you ripen them at home. So these people who were not familiar with these fruits were buying unripe fruits, but they thought that's the way the fruit's supposed to be. They didn't realize it was unripe. So they took these unripe fruits and they cut them up and they put them in my fruit salad. And I didn't enjoy the taste. The taste of the fruit salad was not enjoyable. So even though some of the fruits in the fruit salad were very nice because there were these crunchy, unripe fruits mixed in, therefore it was a semblance of taste. It was a ras abhasa. It wasn't an actual taste, right? And Rupa Goswami has already discussed in other parts of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, other ways there can be ras abhasa. We had a question about this. So someone asked a question that, I used to think ras abhasa was like this, but now in this section, it seems ras abhasa means that the rasa just didn't mature properly. And the answer is that there's different kinds of ras abhasa. It's not that what you thought before was wrong and this is right. It's different kinds. So in the Southern Ocean, in reference to the sattvika bhavas, there were two kinds of sattvika bhav abhasas, and they're very similar to two of the rasa bhasas here. And then in the Eastern Ocean, when Rupa Goswami was discussing bhava, he was discussing in general bhava bhasa, a semblance of bhava. And then in the previous wave, wave 8, Rupa Goswami was describing improper mixtures of bhava. And at the end of that section, he said that generally when there's improper mixtures of bhava, not always, but generally, the result is a rasa basa, a semblance of rasa, and sometimes even lower. Sometimes it's not even a semblance of rasa. So we're going to have, at the very end of the second class today, we're going to have a breakout room where we'll be discussing how this is relevant to our lives as devotees. So please be thinking about that and maybe taking some notes on that as we go through. So again, this particular wave of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, this chapter of Nectar of Devotion, is about a particular kind of rasabhasa, but rasabhasa can happen in other ways as previously described. And I mean, the most obvious reason why Rupa Goswami puts this here is that we want to distinguish between rasa and rasabhasa. We want to know, if I'm going to be cooking for somebody, I want to know how to make it tasty. Right? So here in this way, Rupa Goswami describes 3 types of rasabhasa. So the types are called Uberasa, which Srila Prabhupada translates as a sub-mellow. Vamandev is called Upendra. He's the younger brother of Indra. So Uberasa is kind of like a younger brother of Rasa. And I like the question where someone asked, maybe it's just not matured. So in Uberasa, it's something like that. It's unripe. And then one of the 5 components of rasa is unripe. Then anurasa, anu means small, or it can mean to follow. And just like Prabhupada usually translates anubhava as a sub-ecstasy or following, there's Ram Anuja means Lakshman. So Anuja, ja is birth. So one who follows Ram in birth is his younger brother. Anu, we call ourselves Rup Anuga, right? To follow. So it's following. It's imitation. It's following rasa. So Uparasa is like the younger brother. So it's kind of close. And Uparasa, it's like a younger brother. It's imitation. There's not a connection with Krishna. And some of you had questions of that. We'll discuss that. We'll discuss aparasa, anurasa, and aparasa after the break. So then aparasa, and just like we say in apasampradaya, something that's a false taste. So this is when the ashraya, when the vessel or the shelter of the rasa doesn't have any rati. They're an enemy of Krishna. So in uparasa and anurasa, the ashraya has rati. The ashraya has some love for Krishna, but in aparasa they don't. And again, this is especially anurasa and aparasa are roughly equivalent to 2 of the sattvika abhasas, the sattva. So this is sattvika bhava abhasa. All right, so right now we're going to look at uparasa, which is the type of rasabhasa to which Rupa Goswami gives the most attention. So this is when one of the 5 components of rasa are distorted in some way. There's something that's not right about them. And again, if you think about, you're making a meal, you're making a prep, and there's something wrong with one of the ingredients. Or maybe you've substituted, those of us who cook a lot, we may take a recipe and we may substitute something in the recipe. Right? We might, instead of butter, we might use ghee, or we might use oil. But sometimes, if we're an expert cook, sometimes that can work. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you substitute something and it's like, the taste becomes different. Just like there's cornstarch and there's flour, which we use as thickeners, and there's tapioca, which you can use as a thickener, and there's potato starch that you use as a thickener, but they all act a little differently, and they have different tastes. Okay, so the definition of Uberasa, and I was so happy to find this purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya-lila 597, where Srila Prabhupada defines each of these rasa abhasas. And as we know, the majority of the topics in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Nectar Devotion are also in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Most of them are in the discussion between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sanatana Goswami. So here in Antya-lila 597 purport, Prabhupada says as follows: when the 12 mellows, such as neutrality, servitorship, and friendship, are characterized by adverse Vaibhav, Vibhav, and Anubhav ecstasies, they are known as Uberasa sub-mellows. So here he's calling it adverse. There's something, in other words, again, there's something distorted, there's something undeveloped, or there's something averse. So this has a lot of similarity to this concept of mixing of rasas. But here, instead of improper mixing of a whole rasa, this is an improper mixing within the rasa itself. So if you want to think of what the difference is, if we're going to have an improper mixing of a whole rasa, that's like you're going to put, ketchup on your ice cream. But if you're going to have improper mixing within the rasa, then you've put some ingredient in your ice cream that is not, there's something wrong with that ingredient. Okay, so Rupa Goswami looks at Uberasa in each of the 5 primary staibhavs. So for neutrality, he says there's 3 causes, and Rupa Goswami, Jiva Goswami adds a 4th because Rupa has adi and so on. So he gives 3 causes and then an adi. Then in Jiva Goswami's commentary, he explains. So Uberasa, and rather neutrality, is a love for the Lord in his form as super soul, or a love for the Lord in his form of Vishnu. And so therefore Uberasa is if the person has too much absorption in Brahman instead of the form. And this can happen because many of the devotees, sorry, I have a little sore throat today. Some of the devotees who come to neutrality come through Brahman realization, like the 4 Kumaras and Sukadeva Goswami. They were originally Brahman realized, and then they come to Shanta Rasa, where they're actually in love with the form of the Lord. So if they're excessively absorbed in the Brahman, or they have an extreme non-dual conception, or we have the performer of austerities, they become Shanta Bhaktas. And for them, disdain for the body and disgust for the body is acceptable. But if it's continual, then their staibhav doesn't ripen. And a lot of people who come to Shantaras were originally Gyanis. But if they stay in that Gyan platform and don't mature it to Prema, then again, we have an Uberasa. So absorption in the Brahman, this is a distortion of the Vishaya and the staibhav. So the Vishaya is supposed to be the Lord in his form. It's supposed to be Vishnu, at least the super soul, at least Paramatma, or Vishnu and Vaikuntha. But if instead the person's Vishaya is the Brahman, well, you can't really have Rati for the Brahman. So then the staibhav, the Rati, is a distortion of rasa. And so an example given is seeing you, the ancient person. Today I have realized the bliss of impersonal Brahman. So they're seeing the Lord, but the bliss that they're enjoying is Brahman instead of the bliss of the Lord's personal sweetness, which is the essence of the Rati of this rasa. Then we have an extreme non-dual conception. So this is a distortion of the staibhav, of the Rati. So the example is given: whatever objects I see as you alone, because there's nothing other than you as the cause of all causes and effect, O pure one. So we had a question, and I thought it was a really excellent question, that Uttama Adhikaris have this non-dual conception. And indeed, we have the verse in the Brahma Samhita, Preman Janatarita Bhakti Vilochanena, Santa Sadaiva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti, Amshai Masundara Machinchivinaswarupam, that the devotees who are filled with love see Krishna everywhere. And indeed, we have in the Ramanand Samvada between Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Roy, where Ramananda Roy says to Lord Chaitanya, oh, I see that you are Radha and Krishna. And Lord Chaitanya says, well, you just see Krishna everywhere. He says that the great devotees, when they see the world, they don't exactly see the forms of the world. They don't see the trees and the rivers and the clouds. They just see Krishna. So you might say, well, what's wrong with just seeing Krishna everywhere? Nothing, if you also see Krishna, the form of Krishna. So if all you're seeing is Krishna everywhere, if you don't also see Krishna as the person, then the rati is disturbed. The sthai is disturbed. So imagine, that you're working in a company. So you see the energy of your employer everywhere. But if when your employer walks in the room, you just ignore him because I just see you everywhere. So it becomes distorted. The rati becomes distorted. Okay, Uberasa in servitorship. So there, Rupa Goswami gives 4 causes showing audacity in the Lord's presence, because servitorship is based on reverence. So audacity can be shown. Here's the top search result. Can be shown. Oh, my phone thought that I was talking to it. You can have audacity in friendship, and there's some audacity in conjugal. These are the 2 rasas where one feels equality with the Lord, but not in servitorship. Disrespecting devotees, again, that would be true for anybody, but one in servitorship has this reverence. Seeing the demigods is more attractive. Your vishaya is off. And ignoring scriptural rules, because again, in servitorship, you're very reverential. And you could say the servitors in Vrindavan, they're more intimate, but they still have a sense that I'm supposed to do things like this. Whereas again, the friends, the parents, the lovers they're not so absorbed, especially the lovers are not like that. So here's an example where the Rupa Goswami he just gives an example of one of the 4 showing audacity. And he says, after showing off his lack of bodily control, so he was showing off his ecstasies and being ignored by the devotees when he danced. A fickle Brahmana boy without shame addressed the deity of Krishna in a bold voice, "Oh Lord, look at me." So in Nectar Devotion, this person is identified as Madhu Mangala. And we have some difficulties with Nectar Devotion, that it was produced in 1969, and we have definitely editorial problems with Nectar Devotion. I mean, we have some problems with it, that Srila Prabhupada's finding the right English words, as he himself says in Nectar Devotion, that he was trying to find the right English words for a lot of these terms. Like I noticed Manu Swami in his translation, we use a lot of the Sanskrit words as they are. He doesn't even try to translate them. And the other problem we have is that, having been produced in 1969, when Prabhupada's disciples were new beyond new, they often made some editorial mistakes. So I don't see how this could be Madhu Mangala. Madhu Mangala is in Sakyabhav. This is an example of Dasyabhav. So it's doubtful that this is about Madhu Mangala, and it's also doubtful that Madhu Mangala would display an Uberasa. We did have a question about that. An Uberasa in friendship. So 3 causes of Uberasa in friendship. One is if the relationship is one-sided. Another is disrespect for Krishna's friends. So just like in servitorship, disrespect for Krishna's devotees, here disrespect for Krishna's other friends, and excessive fighting. So although Yuddha Rasa, the secondary Rasa, Uberasa, is very compatible with friendship. If it gets too much, then it becomes inimical. And it's interesting here, of course, what's relevant to ourselves is that disrespect for other devotees or disrespect for other living entities does not allow our feelings for Krishna to ripen. That even if we have other aspects of our devotion intact, if we disrespect the other devotees, it just can't ripen, right? All right, so Rupa Goswami here gives only one example. He gives an example of one-sided friendship. And this is Krishna talking to a king. So Jiva Goswami describes that this king is the father of one of Krishna's children-in-law. So any of you who have married children, I have 3 married children and 1 married grandchild. So when your children get married, their spouse also has parents, right? Like my oldest son married Namapracharine, got initiated as Nitya, and her parents are Gopavindapal and the late Mula Prakriti. So Gopavindapal and Mula Prakriti were socially, when our children get married, they become socially my equals. Right? The parents of your daughter-in-law, the parents of your son-in-law become your social equals. No? So, or my daughter married Mayapur Chandra, his father is Shruti. So he becomes my social equal, right? He would say to me, okay, well, now that our children have married, we're not just god brother and sister, but in the family, we're like brother and sister. So Krishna is approaching this king, who's the father of one of his children, a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law, and Krishna addresses him as a friend. Oh, you are my friend. And the king said, I'm not qualified to be your friend. He's dealing with him in reverence. Then Krishna jokes with the king, and the king starts reciting prayers of praise to him. Then Krishna embraces him, and the king, instead of embracing him back, offers respects on the ground. And what I was really meditating on from this example of an Uberasa is how important it is to reciprocate with Krishna the way he wants to reciprocate with us. You know, that if in the name of humility or in the name of respect, we don't respect what Krishna wants, it reminds me of what Srila Prabhupada gives an example of the guru asks for water and you give the guru milk because you think that the guru wants milk. I had many years ago, I was in a situation where I had broken my foot and I was very dependent on other people doing things for me. And this one girl who was doing things for me, but she would say to me, oh, Urmila, you know, I see you as my guru and I'm so devoted to you. But when I would ask her to do things for me, she would do something else. You know, I'd ask her to bring me rice. I said, you know, my stomach's upset today. Please bring me rice and bananas and yogurt. And she brought me pakoras. And so then it was a disruption to the relationship. So this respecting how Krishna wants us to behave, respecting how other people want us to behave is essential for rasa. Okay, we have uparasa in parental. So here Rupa gives 3 causes: recognizing too much power in the Lord, seeing the Lord as too powerful, making no effort to affectionately care for the Lord as a child, and excessive suffering. So I thought that was also interesting. And Rupa Goswami again just gives an example of one of them, seeing too much power. And he says, oh sister, ever since the time that I saw your son kill the wrestlers as hard as mountains, I cannot be disturbed even if he engages in extended battles. Now, Nectar Devotion, this is attributed to Kamsa. It's possible that, and having Kamsa speaking to Devaki, so that's possible, but it seems unlikely because this wouldn't, it seems that it wouldn't be in sync with Kamsa's mood. We don't have anything from Rupa or Jiva or Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur about who this is. Bhanuswami puts in a footnote that this must have been one of Devaki's co-wives, who would normally be in a parental relationship with Krishna. But parents feel disturbed when their children are engaged in battles. It just, your child goes off to war, even if your child's very competent, you're going to have some fearfulness. You're not just going to be nonchalant. Okay, Uberasa in conjugal. So here there's 3 different categories, and Rupa is going to give causes for each of these categories. So there may be problems with the Staibhav, there may be problems with the Alambana, that would be either the Vishaya or the Ashraya, and there may be problems in the Anubhavas, and sometimes these are kind of mixed together. So in the Staibhav, the essential Rati, Rupa gives 3 causes. If the love is one-sided, which of course relates very much to what we saw in friendship, if you don't reciprocate the way that Krishna wants you to reciprocate, or there's some problem with some problem with on one side or the other. If the woman has many lovers, and if the man treats several women lovers in exactly the same way. So it's interesting because all the scriptures of the world allow polygamy, but they always say the man should treat the women equally, that in order for polygamy to be all right. And Prabhupada says this also. He said polygamy is allowed if the husband can treat the wives equally. Of course, polygamy is illegal in most of the world, but not exactly in the same way. And it's explained when Krishna married his 16,100 wives, that the form of Krishna at the wedding, he had simultaneous wedding, but the form of Krishna at each wedding was a little different because each of the women saw him a little differently. And Krishna reciprocates a little differently with each devotee. All right, an example of one-sided love is the wives of the Brahmanas. So the example that Rupa gives is that Krishna did not love the wives of the Brahmanas in the same way that they loved him. So when the wives of the Brahmanas came to give food to Krishna, they felt a conjugal attraction for him. But Krishna did not feel a conjugal attraction for them. Why? Because they were wives of the Brahmanas. And so at no point, Krishna did not want to have a conjugal relationship with Brahmins' wives. You have with the Vaishya girls, and then he married Kshatriya girls, but he didn't want to have a relationship with Brahmana girls. So therefore, it was one-sided, and therefore the rasa couldn't develop. Now it's explained that the Brahmana's wives later on took birth as gopis. So when they took birth as gopis, presumably in some other manifestation, then that rasa was able to develop. And we have a similar situation between Lord Ramachandra and the sages in the Dandaka forest, where the sages approached, of course, there they also had an inappropriate form, which we'll get to in a moment. But Ram said, I can't reciprocate with you here. You'll have to take birth with Krishna. So therefore, the rasa couldn't develop. Yes, the gopis were also married, but it wasn't the problem that the Brahmins' wives were married. The problem was that they were Brahmanas. So there's pratilom and anulom relationship. And according to the Shastra, a man does not have a romantic, should not have a romantic relationship with a higher class woman. And some people say women have no varna, which is ridiculous. So there are, of course, instances like that. Romaharshan Sutta, his mother was a Brahmana and his father was a Kshatriya. But it was not a proper relationship. Yes, Vinata is saying that the wife wants to be perceived as unique by her husband. Therefore, there needs to be different ways. Yes. Yes, Jayatin Devyani. Of course, Devyani had been cursed that she couldn't marry a Brahmana. So there are some examples, but generally the man should not marry a woman who's higher class than him. And the reason for this is that the woman is supposed to follow her husband. And so if a woman is of a higher class than her husband, it's going to be very difficult for her to follow him. She's going to have to degrade herself to follow him. And this concept is prevalent in all of the cultures of the world in some form, like the idea of a poor man marrying a rich woman. You know, any concept, or an uneducated man marrying a very educated woman. So this kind of situation is frowned upon. So for a woman to marry up is not so much frowned upon. Of course, sometimes the woman can be seen as a gold digger or a status seeker. But for a woman to marry up is not so much frowned upon as for a man to marry up. I mean, it happens, and it can be okay, but it's considered something improper. And Krishna wasn't interested in such a relationship in his Nara Lila. Okay, rati for more than one person. So here an example is giving, one of Radharani's friends says, my dear friend Radharani, you have divided yourself and are partially chaste and partially unchaste. It's all due to Cupid's influence upon you after you saw Krishna and heard the sound of his flute. So it looks like Radharani loves two persons. It looks like she loves Krishna and she loves the person who's playing the flute. Of course, they're the same person. But generally, when a woman loves more than one man, that's an Uberasa. The rasa doesn't develop properly. And of course, we have some instances where that's not the case, like Draupadi, who has 5 husbands, Marisha, who has 10 husbands, the 10 prachetas. There's also a woman in the Bhagavatam, I can't remember her name, who has 49 husbands, 49 fire gods. So rasa can develop in such situations, but generally it doesn't. And the question is, these rules of conduct are generally transmitted to one generation to another by culture. Yes, correct. Okay, so if there's irregularity in the staibab due to one-sided love, it will also have irregularity in the vibhava. So the vibhava, again, is the object of love, the vishaya, or the vessel of love, the ashraya. So we're going to look at causes in the vibhava, in the alambana, in the ashraya, but they could also be seen as problems with one-sided love in the staibab. They could be categorized either way. Okay, so this list is incomplete. This is a partial list that Rupa's giving. So the causes for Uberasa in the conjugal rasa, if there's a problem in the vibhava, in the alambana ashraya, so in the vessel that makes things one-sided. So lack of cleverness in love, or lack of good dress, lack of, if the ashraya doesn't have a suitable form or a suitable species, or a lack of suitable purity. So this is when there's an experience of bliss by plants and creepers. They don't have the right form. And the devotees attribute Madhurya Ras to them, but they don't have the right form. And the elderly women, they're described sometimes as having Madhurya Ras for joking, and the Pulinda women don't exhibit proper cleverness. Okay, so Jiva's commentary on 4.9.24 is that purity, appropriate form and species, cleverness, and good dress must be found in the alambana. This is in the ashraya. For Madhurya, it would be in the vishaya too, obviously, for Madhurya Ras to manifest properly. So both the objects, both the vishaya and the ashraya, both the objects and the experiencers of love should have these excellent qualities inherent in them. Can Rasabhasa be corrected? We have this question. Yes, the Brahmana's wives, they took birth as gopis and corrected it. When the gopis showed up for the Rasa Lila with their dresses all disarrayed, which was charming in their love for Krishna, then Yogamaya arranged for them to get proper dresses. So they weren't trying to dance with their belts on their feet. Okay, so we have an example of plants. So the gopi saying, this creeper with new branches, hearing the flute, develops goosebumps with its buds. Clinging to the Lord, it has become engraved with his nails. O beautiful woman, it engages in loving affairs just as you do. So there's no defect in the rasa. There's no uparasa in the gopis who are attributing madhurya to the plants, but the plants don't have the proper form to have madhurya with Krishna. So if they have any conjugal feelings, those can't develop into rasa in that plant body. They could be in Shanturas with some appreciation of the Madhurya Ras, but they can't actually have Madhurya Ras. A similar example is there for the animals. See these fortunate deer experiencing bliss, today purified by the side glance of Krishna, that's Madhurya. They are casting playful glances of conjugal love at his limbs. So again, there's no problem with the gopis who are thinking this way about the animals, but the animals themselves, even though they may be appreciative of Krishna's conjugal rasa, they themselves, it cannot mature in that form into rasa. And then we have the Pulinda women, the tribal women. Look here, the Pulinda women, seeing the restless eyes of Hari on the bank of the Yamuna, or wandering about with their hair standing on end. So there are residents, human-like residents of the forest. There are, tribals now is not considered a proper term, but the indigenous people who live in the forest. And then, of course, there are gods and goddesses who live in the forest, Vrinda Devi's associates. So here, these women, we know from the Bhagavatam that they're taking the kumkum from Krishna's feet that had touched the breasts of his beloveds, and they're putting that on their own breasts, and then they're feeling satisfied. But in that form, their rasa is not going to mature. And we have in some of the literature of the Goswamis that sometimes the gopis will tease Krishna. Oh, why don't you have a relationship with these women? Then we have the old women. So here Rupa Goswami gives an example of, look, Radha, this old woman has dyed her hair black using kajal and has raised her breasts by inserting bilva fruits in her bodice. She makes Krishna laugh as she throws amorous glances at him. But this is just joking. And we had this example previously that one of the old women, Krishna said to her, you look like a monkey. The king of the monkeys wants to marry you. And the woman said, oh, I've already decided to marry you, Krishna. But that doesn't mature into rasas. Yes, so what Prabhupada Priya says, could this be seen as one-sided? Yes, so that's exactly what I said at the beginning of this section, that all of these defects in the ashraya can also be explained in terms of a defect in the staibhav, where the love is one-sided. So you could say that these defects in the ashraya are all subcategories of one-sided love in the staibhav. Okay, so here are problems in the anubhavs. So this is the manifestation of love. We have transgressing the code of conduct. We have vulgarity and we have audacity. So what do we mean by codes of conduct? Because in conjugal rasa, codes of conduct doesn't mean scriptural rules. So Rupa says that it means that you should have jealous anger when Krishna is supposed to meet you and he goes to another girl. And the man should have gentle responses to the woman's jealous anger. So the man doesn't get angry at her in return. And it's quite interesting in the science of rasa that this is not Rodra rasa. Again, it was explained that it's a Vyavichari bhav rather than a sthai bhav, when the women get angry, when the conjugal lovers get angry at Krishna. So it's proper for rasa for the women to get angry at the lover, but it's not rasa for the man to get angry at the lover. Now, in Ujjwal Nilamani, Rupa Goswami does give two examples of Krishna getting very when she's late. So, but not the kind of jealous anger. So that's quite interesting, and it's certainly interesting in terms of our relationships in this world. Improper conduct example. So, though you are marked by the nails of other women lovers, I give up all shyness and request that you please accept me. So instead of being annoyed and irritated, the woman is saying, I don't care, you have other lovers, I'll love you also. So vulgarity is calling Krishna a child, using disagreeable language and scratching one's private parts. So an example of vulgarity is by Kaliya's wives, where they call him a baby. So they're talking about conjugal rasa, but they're calling him a baby. Oh, baby cowherd, how is it that you loosen the belts of us young snake girls living in the lake of Kaliya by the sound of your flute? So this shows their lack of expertise in loving affairs. Now, of course, it's very interesting that in our modern society, romantic lovers call each other baby. So the male calls the female, his female wife or lover, baby, and the woman calls her male husband or lover, baby. And I read an essay on this some time ago, that they mean baby in the sense of that a baby is very vulnerable. And in romantic affairs, one makes oneself completely vulnerable. But if you actually call your spouse or your lover a child, oh, you're just like a little child. You know, and sometimes you hear women talk like that. Huh, I have 4 kids, or 3 kids, and my husband is my 4th kid. And it's unsightly. It damages the taste. Okay, so what's the meaning of audacity? Or actually, this is a mistake. It's supposed to be an example of audacity. So my dear Govinda, here is a nice flowery bush. I am a young girl and you are a poetic young boy. After this, what more can I say? You just consider. So being too forward. All right, so Uberasa in the secondary rasas, and Rupa doesn't explain them or give any examples, but he says they can be understood in a similar manner. So we have some time for questions. On Uberasa. We had a lot of questions during talking about it, which kind of extended the time I spent on it, but do we have any more questions on Uberasa? All right. Oh, yes. Okay.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Sarika, yes.
Mataji, so if Rasa Basa is there in the spiritual world, so how can one get to spiritual world? I mean,
well, the examples all given of Rasa Basa, all the examples that Rupa gave were in the Bhauma.
And also, how do we see that this Rasa Basa is not, we are not acting in Rasa Basa? How do we correct ourselves?
Well, we can tell if our taste isn't developing. You know, it's interesting if our taste is restricted or not developing. We generally in the Krishna consciousness movement just say, well, that's due to Vaishnava aparad, and that could be possible, but our taste could be not developing due to other causes. And one of the causes could be that we're mixing our bhakti with gyan, or we're mixing our bhakti with karma, you know, or we have like karma measure bhakti or gyan measure bhakti. And another cause could be that we have improper mixing of tastes, as we described last week, or that there's some, you know, that we're behaving improperly in our dealings with Krishna. So Rupa Goswami is giving this to us so that we can understand these things and that we can make proper corrections. Yes, Prabhupada Priya.
Hare Krishna. If there is some uparasa due to immaturity of the devotee, won't that rectify itself as long as the devotee continues performing bhakti because they'll become mature, or will the uparasa block their possibility of advancing?
Well, that depends. That's like asking about any of our problems in bhakti. Will it go away in bhakti, or do we have to intentionally make it go away? And both things are true. So all of our difficulties, all of our blocks, all of our anartas go away naturally in bhakti, but as part of bhakti, we should also be willing to root out our anartas. Some of them go away just without paying much attention to them. I mean, I think we could have a similar question about children. To what extent do children lose their bad qualities simply by growing up? And to what extent do children lose their bad qualities by instruction of elders and education? And it's a little of both. Some of the bad qualities of children go away naturally. Nobody has to do anything about it at all. It just, as you mature, they just fall away in and of themselves. And some of the bad qualities of children have to be trained out of them. You know, the child has to make an effort to get rid of them. And some, there's a combination. They tend to go away naturally by themselves, and you also have to make some effort. So it's the same in bhakti. Making some effort is part of bhakti. You know, I want to make some effort to present myself nicely to Krishna. Mahalakshmi?
Yes, I have something that I didn't understand.
Okay.
In verse Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 4:9-17, it says, in Madhubaroparas, the lover treats all women lovers equally, despite their different, you mentioned something about that, despite their different types of prema.
Yes.
Okay.
So what is your question?
Okay, now I understand, because when I was reading this, I couldn't understand, but now I'm remembering your words. Yes, Krishna, you gave the example of the queens of Dwarka. So according to their mood, he would treat them. Okay.
Yeah.
Different.
Or you think, you know, there's the Sakis and the Manjaris. Krishna doesn't treat them exactly the same. But even each individual gopi, he's going to treat, because they're different.
Yes.
Krishna's not going to treat Vishaka exactly the way he treats Lalita.
Yes.
You know,
But
that would cause a problem. They're different people. They have different moods. They have different personalities.
yeah, but the question, but this Madhuroparasa means anapa rasa basa.
Rasa, all of these are rasa basas.
Really? And Krishna can be acting in rasa basa? He's the king of all rasas.
Who said Krishna did that?
Well, Madhuroparasa, the lover, treats all his women lovers.
But does he
equal.
do that? Does
Yes.
Krishna do that?
Yes, we just said he treats them differently.
That's what he's supposed to do. Therefore, there's no uparasa.
Yes, so then what is this Madhuroparasa?
If it happens, there's rasabasa, but it doesn't happen with Krishna. He doesn't do that. He treats each of the women differently, equally but differently.
Yes, equally but differently. Okay.
Just like you have 3 sons. Do you treat
Yes.
them all exactly the same?
No.
Of course not. You know, you love them equally,
Yes.
but you don't treat them exactly the same because they're very different people.
Yes.
So if a man has more than one wife or more than one lover, and he treats them the same. So why talk about something that doesn't exist?
Good question.
Okay, I think that's why you're
That's the
asking this
question.
That's actually a good question. Well, remember that this science of rasa, well, first of all, it also exists materially.
Yeah.
So in Rupa Goswami's society, for a man to have more than one life was fairly common. I mean, for most of us, it's not very common. I mean, unless you live in parts of Africa where I met a devotee in Mayapur whose father was a king in Africa and had 20 wives. So, if you live in a place like that, but for most of us, I mean, there are, of course, in America, a lot of Mormon sects where there's polygamy. But if that's such a situation, then there's going to be an Uberasa if you treat all your wives exactly the same. If the man goes to one wife's house and says, well, my other wife does exactly like this, so you have to do exactly like this too. It's going to damage the rasa. And I think as far as Krishna, it's helpful for us to understand that such an Uberasa doesn't exist in Krishna. And therefore, we can relish the fact that Krishna deals differently with each devotee, that we shouldn't think that because Krishna has 16,108 wives, and I'm sure in the spiritual world he has unlimited wives, that therefore his dealings with each of them are exactly the same, or his dealings with each of the gopis are exactly the same. That if we think like that, we are imposing an Uberasa on Krishna, and therefore we should understand that such a thing doesn't exist. Okay, so I want to go on. Thank you, excellent, very thoughtful questions. Okay, we have Anurasa, which is imitation of rasa. Again, this is like a younger brother. So turning again to this definition of Anurasa in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Ancha 597, I found these definitions much easier to understand than Nectar Devotion or Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So this particular, I was looking at the translations in Nectar Devotion, I was looking at Bhanuswami's translations, I was looking at David Haberman's translations, and I was like, what? And then when I found this in Chaitanya Charitamrita, then everything put together. It took me actually several days to find, this is the translation. Because here in this purport, Srila Prabhupada is translating these verses from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So when Prabhupada's translation here is when the 7 indirect transcendental mellows and the dried up mellow of neutrality, he's not saying neutrality is always dried up, are produced by devotees in moods not directly related to Krishna and devotional service and ecstatic love. They are described as Anurasa imitation mellows. Now, I also find an excellent translation in a copy I have of Jaiva Dharma. It's an online copy. I don't know who the translator is. So in chapter 30, it's translated, again, this is just translations of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu verses. When the secondary rasas are manifest by a person who at that time has tatastha bhav, neutral emotion. So this is not the same as Shanta Ras towards Krishna. They are designated as Anurasa. So if their feeling toward Krishna at the time is neutral, and they're manifesting a secondary rasa, not a primary rasa. This Anu rasa only applies to the secondary sthai-bhavs. And it's when the person who's experiencing the secondary sthai-bhavs is feeling neutral towards Krishna. And also, if vira, chivalrous emotion, is manifested by personalities only distantly associated with Krishna, this may also be designated as Anurasa. So in Jaiva Dharma chapter 30, the question is asked, and this was my question. Well, actually, I had the opposite question, but this answered my question. The question in Jaiva Dharma was, how can such an emotion be designated as rasa when it arises in the heart of someone who is distant for Krishna? Surely at best, such sentiment is gross mundane rasa. Why then is it called anurasa? So my question was, how can a devotee have something that's distant from Krishna? And the question in Jaiva Dharma was, how can someone who's distant from Krishna have something we can call any relationship with rasa? Isn't it just mundane, perverted rasa? Now, the answer is that rasas that don't have a direct and personal connection with Krishna are anurasas. Certainly there is a slight and distant connection with Krishna, but not a direct one. This is Anurasa. So it's not that there's no connection with Krishna. Yes, emotionally distant at that time. Now it can be the person has an emotionally distant relationship with Krishna all the time. Then we have an aparasa, which we'll discuss after the break. But if they're emotionally distant from Krishna at that time, and they're experiencing a secondary sthai-bhav, it's called an anurasa. Now, this description, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, it's very similar to a category of sattvika bhav that was described in the Southern Ocean, digda sattvika bhav, which is mixed, soft, and harsh, and Prabhupada translates as burnt. And this is experienced by devotees, but not directly related to Krishna. Now, a little difference from that is that in the digda sattvika bhav, the devotee then relates it to Krishna. So the example that Rupa Goswami gave there was that Mother Yasoda had a dream about Putana and felt scared. And her fear of Putana, this fear is a secondary sthai-bhav, this fear of Putana, she then related to Krishna. Whereas in this case, in the Anurasa, we don't find that subsequent thing. We don't find that the person experiences a secondary sthai-bhav unrelated to Krishna and then relates it to Krishna. It stays unrelated to Krishna. So we have a question here in the chat. Do we mean that all mundane rasas are actually anurasas? No, we don't. Thank you. Excellent question. An anuras has an indirect relationship with Krishna. Mundane rasas do not. So mundane rasas are, well, I mean, everything has, but the person has no awareness of a relationship with Krishna in mundane rasas. There's no conscious awareness. Whereas in anuras, there is a kind of neutral awareness of a relationship with Krishna, because in anuras, the examples are devotees. I mean, when Rupa described the digda sattvika bhava, the explanation there was that those devotees always have a relationship with Krishna. Their rati is always there. They were talking about devotees who have a primary rati, they have a primary sthai-bhav, they always have a direct relationship with Krishna. But in that moment, their secondary rasa, they don't relate it with Krishna directly. But because they have this inner relationship with Krishna, it's called an anurasa. Whereas mundane people who have no awareness of a relationship with Krishna, their rasa is just perverted rasa. It's not spiritual rasa. Well, Rupa Goswami gives two examples. He gives one example of the gopis, that the gopis saw Radharani's pet monkey. Now, if you don't laugh at this picture, I don't know. I mean, when I found this picture, I started cracking up. So, they saw Radharani's pet monkey, Kakati, prancing and doing pranks, and they started laughing. So laughing is a secondary rasa. But they didn't relate that laughter to Krishna. Like we have in the Digda Sattvika Bhav, Mother Yasoda ends up relating that fear. Oh, Putana, oh, Krishna. Whereas they don't do that. So therefore it's called an anurasa. It's like a younger brother of rasa. How do they move from a non-direct to a direct one? Well, if we have the example of Mother Yasoda in the Digda Sattvika Bhav, where she felt frightened at her dream of Putana, and then that became fear for Krishna's safety. It wasn't fear for Krishna's safety initially, but then it moved to that. Now, we're enjoined to do this in general in our lives. In general in our lives in this world, we're instructed that whatever moves us emotionally in this world, we then relate to Krishna. That's what we're supposed to do. Now, I found it interesting that pure devotees do have these anurasas that are only indirectly related to Krishna. I found it interesting. And presumably this exists also in the spiritual world, not just in Boma Lila. And we have this example of Narada, who is feeling wonder when he heard the parrots in Bandiravan discussing Vedanta philosophy. So his wonder, again, it didn't then go to Krishna. So because Narada always has rati, it's anurasa. Okay, so we're going to take some questions on this, and then we're going to take a break. So any questions? We had some already, obviously, in the chat, but any questions on anurasa? Yes, Prabhupada Priya.
Yeah, so this seems to indicate that even in the spiritual world, it's not that all relationships or emotions are with or for Krishna.
Yes, that is definitely what it seems to indicate.
But that those relationships, but those emotions are still rasa.
They're anurasa. They're younger brothers of rasa.
So is anurasa, because usually when we talk about rasa basa, it's like a bad thing. It's like not a thing that, so is anurasa a bad thing, or is it just a thing?
We will answer that question at the end of the second class.
Because it doesn't seem wrong for the gopis
We
to
will
laugh at
answer
Radharani's monkey.
We will answer that excellent question at the end of
Okay.
the second class.
Stay tuned.
Coming attractions. Any other question on anurasa? Okay, let's take a break. 10-minute break. Please take a real break. Get away from your phone or computer, move around, drink some water, whatever, and we will see you. So we're now going to look at Uberasa. So you think of Appa like an Appa Sampradaya. It's not part of the Sampradaya. So we're going to go again to the definition, but the way Prabhupada translates this verse of definition in his purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita onto 597. And in this purport, he translates all three of these kinds of rasa basa. Definition of Uberasa. If Krishna and the enemies who harbor feelings of opposition towards him are respectively the object and abodes of laughter and other secondary mellows, the resulting feelings are called Uberasa, opposing mellows. So here we have, it's again, just like Anurasa, this only deals with secondary saibhavs. And here, the Ashraya is an enemy. All right, and the translation I have from Jaiva Dharma, chapter 30. In a situation where Krishna is the Vishaya object of hasya ras, laughter, etc., in other words, the secondary rasas, and his enemies are the Ashraya, shelters or enjoyers of this rasa, then such rasas are called Uberasa. All right, so there's just one example of Uberasa. The repeated derisive laughter of Jarasandhar upon seeing the flight of Krishna. Ha ha, Krishna is running away. All right, any questions on Uberasa? So, of course, there's many examples given in other places in Bhakti Rasamrita, just and in other places in general, of enemies of Krishna who experience fear, anger, laughter, etc., in relationship to Krishna, but they don't have rati for Krishna. There's no rati. There's no primary staibhav. And if you remember about the secondary staibhavs, for the secondary staibhavs to be considered staibhavs, there has to be the existence of a primary staibhav. So in the other example of Anurasa, those are people who do have a primary staibhav, but it wasn't so much related to their manifestation of the secondary staibhav. Here we have situations of people who don't have a primary staibhav with Krishna. They don't have rati for Krishna. So the secondary staibhavs cannot become secondary staibhavs because they have to be related to a primary staibhav. Anybody have any questions at all on Uberasa? Something that looks like rasa, but it's not at all because the shelter of it has no rati for Krishna. Any questions at all? Yes, Prabhupada Priya.
No, there's that verse from the Bhagavatam that's kamam kodam bayam whatever, like whether one's a fear, anger.
Oh, you're jumping again to the end of my presentation for this class. That is the very last verse I have in this slideshow. So please put that in the parking lot or the car park, depending on what part of the world you're in. Nothing like having students in the class who are all teachers. I think all of you in this class are also Shastric teachers. So you immediately figure all these things out. Rukmini asked in the chat, is Uberasa like Aparada in that it doesn't advance one in bhakti at all? No. And that we will get to at the end of this class. But it is, I like that you bring up Aparada. It's in opposition. So it's a rasa, but it's an aparasa. It's actually opposed to rasa. It's actually opposed to rasa. All right. So here we are at the answer. It's all good. It's all good. So this is from Nectar Devotion. This is a quote from Nectar Devotion. Everything in connection with Krishna is called ecstatic devotional love, though it may be exhibited in different ways, sometimes in right order, and sometimes as a perverted reflection. According to the opinion of all expert devotees, anything that will arouse ecstatic love for Krishna is to be taken as an impetus for transcendental mellow. So that means these rasa basas can act as udipanas. They can act as a stimulant. Now, how does Srila Prabhupada translate this verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita? Again, Ancha 597. Experts in distinguishing one mellow from another sometimes accept some overlapping transcendental mellows, rasa basa, as rasas due to their being pleasurable and tasteful. So I have a picture here of a drink made from kale, bananas, and cherries. So we wouldn't think of kale and bananas and cherries as being compatible, but they could make a nice drink. All right, and if we go to, I can't remember if this is Manu Swami's or David Haberman's, and here I have a picture of pineapple pizza. So this is Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 4.941. Some experts in rasa say that all babas, even baba basas and rasa basas, are rasa since they are enjoyable. And then, yes, I anticipated Prabhupada Priya's point, and here is the Brahma Samhita verse. Yam krota kama sahaja pranayadi bhiti vatsalya moha guru gora vasevya bhavai sancinchitasam sadvasim tanumapurete govindamadi purisham tamaham bhajami. I adore the primeval Lord Govinda, the meditators of whom, by meditating upon him under the sway of wrath, amorous passion, natural friendly love, fear, parental affection, delusion, reverence, and willing service, attain to bodily forms befitting the nature of their contemplation. And of course, we have examples of demons who go back to Godhead because although they start out being apa rasa, they're experiencing rasa in opposition to Krishna. That emotional connection with Krishna, although it's in opposition, ends up bringing them to real rasa. Right? That Kamsa attained Vaikuntha, Pandraka attained Vaikuntha, Putana attained Goloka. So this does happen. This is not the recommended process. We do not recommend that people intentionally engage in these rasa basas. But if they do bring you to Krishna, if you're with your devotee friends and you're laughing about something, or you're together angry about something, or you're afraid of something, and you don't directly relate it to Krishna, it can still bring you to Krishna. And this is something that I had some realization of when years ago I was working in an outside job in a government school, where I had to hide the fact that I'm a member of the Hare Krishna movement. And I was realizing that even when devotees are not directly talking about Krishna, that there's always this undercurrent of Krishna. And when I was with people who don't have any connection with Krishna, even an inimical connection with Krishna, that was absent. And it was noticeably absent, that there was this subtle undercurrent of a connection with Krishna among the devotees. So now we have ended the northern ocean of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which ends the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And congratulations. I am under the impression that the entire Nectar Devotion and the entire Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is not generally taught. So that we have been through the whole thing is a very wonderful thing. We're going to do a breakout room and then we'll do questions at the end. So I'm not taking any more questions right now. So the end dedication of the Northern Ocean has, again, two possible translations. One is, may the eternal soul who has the beautiful form of a cowherd boy and who spread the bhavas to Rama and other forms be pleased with this northern section of the ocean of sweet rasa. And the other possible translation is, may Sanatana, who nourishes the bhava of Gopal Bhatta and distributes the bhava of Raghunath Das, be pleased with this northern section of the ocean of sweet rasa. So we're going to do a 10-minute breakout room. And I'd like you to discuss the relevance to us. What is the relevance of what we discussed today to our own bhakti? So we have been studying the science of rasa and the 5 components of rasa. And we thank, of course, Srila Prabhupada and Rupa Goswami for this wonderful book. So we have, I don't know if we'll go to the end of the class today. We have a little bit of extra time. And anybody who has any questions on anything we've discussed today or in the northern and western oceans. And yes, I like your point in Prabhupada that you made about 10:29:15. So I went and looked that up, and I'll add that slide to the presentation before I send it out to all of you. So this is in regard to the Ras dance, where Amaraj Parikit was asking how the gopis could become elevated by seeing Krishna as their lover. And Sukadeva Goswami responds, person who constantly direct their lust, anger, fear, protective affection, feelings of impersonal oneness or friendship toward Lord Hari are sure to become absorbed in thought of him. So they're very, very similar to the Brahma Samhita verse. Also, I'd be interested to know what you discussed in the breakout rooms as far as the relevance of this chapter to our own lives. Anybody, if they'd like to share. So if anybody would like to share from their breakout rooms or any questions at all, either of them. Yes, Rukmini.
Yeah, so what I said in the breakout room, and I would say to you also, is that when I read about Rasabhas in the Nectar of Devotion, I didn't really, long ago when I first read it, I didn't really understand it and I didn't really worry about it. It seemed just very, not relevant. And so then when I, in this class, then I read about it in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Then then especially after your presentation, which is much more clear, then I'm like more worried about it. Like, it could be very easily like, there's so many ways of committing rasabhas, and it's actually very easy to commit rasabhas. But this last verse that was there and that you mentioned, I guess, does that mean that one doesn't need to worry about it, or what does that mean?
Well, in terms of this particular chapter, what is it that we do need to be concerned about? And I think one of the things to be concerned about is whether or not our dealings with Krishna are appropriate. Am I reciprocating with Krishna the way he's reciprocating with me? Am I acting appropriately to different times, place, and situations? Is there something inappropriate in my dealings with Krishna? So that's one way. Another way is that when we do experience various kinds of emotions, tasty emotions that may be not directly related with Krishna, to then relate them to Krishna.
Hmm.
So that's another takeaway, another thing that we can intentionally do. And I think another thing that we can intentionally do is encourage people in having some emotional connection with the Lord, even if it's improper. We want to encourage emotion, not just philosophy. One of the donkey urine baths described by Bhakti Vinod in his commentary to Raghunath Das Goswami's verse 6 of Manashiksha is restricting your emotions and relating to Krishna only philosophically. So if people have emotions in relation to Krishna, even if they're in opposition to Krishna, just like my grandson-in-law was telling us a story yesterday that when he was in the Marines, so when he was at a Camp Pendleton training camp, that he would chant Hare Krishna out loud whenever he could. So anytime he was in the camp, he would be chanting Hare Krishna out loud. And some of the other Marines would make fun of him. Oh, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. But that is a kind of namabas that's described in the Bhagavatam as namabas. However, we're happy that they're chanting Hare Krishna, just like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati used to count how many times Krishna's name was there, right? And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada and A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, they were happy at even negative news articles that mentioned Krishna's name a lot of times. And so another way we can apply this is, instead of just condemning people, there's at least one purport where Prabhupada talks about sahajiyas and says, at least they have some connection with Krishna. You know, so there's all these warnings, don't be a sahajiya, but at least they have some connection with Krishna. And eventually, he says, I paraphrase, that will purify them. So that's another takeaway from this. And I'm sure there's more. Maybe some of you have more you'd like to contribute, Mahalakshmi?
Oh, yeah.
Or did you have something else with me before I go to Mahalakshmi?
Oh, I was just saying that I was struck especially by the I forget which kind of rasabhas it was in the Sakya Ras, where Krishna was trying to be friendly to the person and the person was being very reverent. And so this not reciprocating, that was something to be aware of. So I hadn't really thought of that.
Yeah, I was also very struck by that. And we could say this also applies. There's in Bhaktivinod's Bhakti Loka, in his section on Niyamagraha, where he talks about how at different stages of bhakti, the rules change as we progress.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't progress, if you don't actually accept the new standard, then the old standards will act as chains around your feet. I'm thinking about, Prabhupada would say to devotees, when you chant Hare Krishna, you should feel the presence of Krishna and remember Krishna's pastimes. If you can't do that, just hear the name.
Mm-hmm.
And we have people who are mature in bhakti and can certainly meditate on Krishna's pastimes and feel Krishna's presence when they chant. And instead, they force themselves to just listen to the sound of the name and not allow themselves to meditate on Krishna. Mm-hmm. That's a very good example.
Yes.
I think if you've only been connected with the movement for a week or two, and you'd say to someone, chant Hare Krishna and think of Krishna, they can't think of Krishna. They don't know anything about Krishna. Who knows what they'll think about? But Prabhupada, even in 1969, was telling people, when you chant Hare Krishna, you immediately feel Krishna's presence and think of Krishna. I mean, another example, of course, is when a person's ready to transition from Vaidhi Bhakti to Raganuga Bhakti, and Krishna gives them an invitation that their rati starts to awaken in a little form. And if the person then goes, no, I have to stay on the reverential platform. So this also causes a problem. I mean, and it's true also to some extent with guru. The guru is maybe pushing us to come to a higher platform, and if we're resisting it, no, I want to, or to stretch ourselves, and we're resisting. And you notice that this example of the king, I don't know if there must be a name in Sanskrit, and I'm sure in other Indian languages, for the specific relationship you have with the parents of your children's spouses. I'm sure there must be a specific, we don't have one in English. In English, I just have to say, my son-in-law's father, or my grandson-in-law's mother. I don't have
We have suegro.
You have in Spanish. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
we do.
Okay. So, that example was given where this person who was now related by marriage as an equal refused to treat Krishna as an equal. He was just pulling back. And you notice that when he's pulling back, most likely he's doing it thinking that it was devotion. He's thinking, no, I want to be devoted. I don't want to be casual. I want to be devoted. Now that's appropriate if that's actually your rasa. So we have Mahaprabhu who's pushing Murari Gupta to worship Krishna, and Murari Gupta is resisting and saying, no, I want to worship Ram. In that case, it was Mahaprabhu testing him. And that was not a rasabhasa, because he actually does have a relationship with Ram. Or the example given earlier in Nectar of Devotion, I believe, with Patri, who's in Dasi Bhav, and he's around Krishna and Krishna's friends, and they start joking. And he finds himself starting to smile at the jokes, and then he pulls back. But that's an example of rasa, because Patri doesn't really have a taste for Sakya Ras. It's not his taste. He pulls back into his own taste. Whereas this example with the son or daughter-in-law's father, he was meant to have a taste of Sakya. So he's pulling back from his own taste. So to pull back from a taste that's not ours is appropriate. When we look at the mixing of rasas, the inappropriate mixing of rasas, to go into a taste that's improper mixing with ours is going to cause rasabhasa. And to not go into our own taste, to go into some uncomplimentary taste. And conversely, not to go into our own taste is going to cause a rasabhasa. So we have something here about being authentic. And I would suggest that this is also materially applicable. I think it could be materially applicable even to the varnas and the ashrams. A person who's meant for renunciation and artificially stays married when they're 70 years old. Or, cases I deal with all the time where people artificially stay in the brahmacharya ashram and then have some kind of fall down when they're 45. So, not to be in the grahasta, to be artificially in the brahmacharya ashram or artificially in the grahasta ashram, to be in your own place, or the same with the varnas. Where Krishna uses the word bhayavaha. It's a vehicle of fear. If you're meant to act as a brahmana, if that's your nature and you act instead as a vaishya, or you're meant to act as a vaishya and you act instead as a brahmana. So we should be authentic. And either way, being inauthentic is a problem. When we're being invited to come into our own place and we resist it, that's a problem. When we're invited to come out of our place and we don't resist it, that's a problem. Did everybody follow that?
Yes.
I remember counseling one devotee who was obviously a brahmana, just obviously to anyone who knew him. And I said, you need to act as a brahmana. And he was actively resisting it. And so he was experiencing not a taste in his life. His life wasn't tasty. And like I know someone else who knows he's a kshatriya, and people have tried to push him to be a brahmana, and he won't do it. Because if he tries to do it, then his life becomes not tasty. Our life is supposed to be tasty. The purpose of life, Prabhupada says, is ananda, which is rasa. Our life is meant to be full of rasa. So if I'm not being who I am, or if I'm artificially being who I'm not, which are related but two somewhat separate things, then I don't get real rasa. Is that all right?
Yes, thank you so much.
Mahalakshmi.
Yes, two things. In relation to what we discuss in the groups, what it made me a very nice vision is this that we mentioned with my question, that not to be afraid, because Krishna is always relating to each of us according to our real nature, no? And I gave an example, like, for instance, sometimes devotees think, ladies think, oh, if I would be a brahmachari, then I could travel with my guru like that. And sometimes they wonder why my spiritual master is not treating me like these other devotees. So they say with Krishna, no? Krishna, the spiritual master, they know. So that's, I like to hear about this, how you develop this explanation. And I find it very, very encouraging and like giving solace, you say in English, in the heart, because Krishna knows. And another thing is, you mentioned answering Rukmini. I didn't mention in the group, but when I was reading about Rasa Bhas, I was feeling, well, this is for Sahajas. I didn't think that it was applying to us also. So thank you very much for this wonderful seminar.
This was actually, I had a lot of difficulty in preparing this class. Probably like 3 or 4 days trying to figure out what in the world Anurasa is. So it was, and thank you, Krishna, that I found that quote in the Chaitanya Charitamrita and then in Jaiva Dharma. But yeah, I remember, initially reading this in Nectar of Devotion, just going, huh? But I really like what you say about that Krishna and Guru, they're dealing with us each individually. And to think, the way that devotee is being dealt with, that's better than the way that I'm being dealt with. How that devotee is situated, or, I want to be in that position. Therefore, Krishna says, even if you think you can do someone else's duty perfectly, and even if you think you're doing your duty imperfectly, better to be in your own position. I had a devotee a little while ago who contacted me and said, Urmila, I wish I could be like you. And I said, no, you don't want to be like me. I said, you're seeing my strengths, but you don't realize that I have to pay for all of them. And you're probably not willing to pay the price I pay for my strengths. I said, anyway, you have your strengths. Why do you want mine? He said, use your glory, use your gifts, use your talents. I said, you might think that mine look more attractive, but you haven't looked at the price tag. So, go with what you are, be who you are for Krishna. I said, you couldn't be who I am anyway. It just wouldn't work. Like I can't be who you are. Chaminanda Baru.
Thank you very much. I think most of that what we discussed, that was the original question in our breakout room, was already now answered. We had also very strongly the impression that those descriptions of these different rasa bhasas and anurasas and so on, they were very much relevant to our life, especially if we are sadhakas and we do so many mistakes, or unconsciously maybe we have some indifference towards Krishna, or we ignore Krishna or the devotees, and then this gives these sometimes almost inimical thoughts towards Krishna or the devotees, or sometimes we mix up things. And especially we could observe these things during kirtan maybe, or during reading, where we have some misunderstandings or some distasteful thoughts, depending on our advancement. And it could be very much interesting to really try to understand and analyze these things more properly than to just, excuse it as I'm just not there yet. And hope that it dissolves just magically. So this could be very helpful to all our spiritual lives. And thank you very much for your very insightful realizations to this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think what you said is very important. That many times devotees don't even read these sections. or just gloss over them, or, oh, that's something for later. But why would Srila Prabhupada have written Nectar of Devotion in 1969 and said the devotees should read it 2, 3, 4 times if he felt it wasn't relevant for us? Why would he want it in the university libraries? You know, Srila Prabhupada wanted the entire Nectar of Devotion in the Bhakti Shastri course. So it is relevant to us, and it isn't just something we're going to say, oh yeah, it'll take care of itself. Prabhupada Priya?
Yeah, I have a question about, maybe there's a very new devotee, like they've been, in Krishna consciousness for a year or less, and they like to speak a lot about Radharani and Radha and Krishna, and when they do, it's kind of like, it doesn't feel good, like to hear them speaking like that. It's kind of like, can you talk about something else? But then you don't want to discourage them, because you want them to feel like they do have a genuine relationship with Radha and Krishna, and we're supposed to speak Krishna Katha. But I don't know, is that a rasa basa, and like how to deal with that in a way that's not discouraging?
It probably is. There's probably some defect in the ashraya, that the ashraya or the vessel doesn't have the proper cleverness. As we found, that was one of the defects, right? If the ashraya doesn't have the proper cleverness. And part of your evidence for that is that you feel uncomfortable. So I've also experienced that, people are acting very enthusiastic about something, and you're like, do you really feel that way? Is that something genuine going on, or are you just imitating something? So at the same time, we don't want to be discouraging, because it can lead to something. So there's this sort of fine line. What I've seen in my own preliminary, I didn't do thorough, extensive research, but in preliminary research that I've seen, is that Srila Prabhupada was encouraging for higher emotions, but he wasn't encouraging when people approached higher things from a detached logical perspective. So when a devotee wrote to Srila Prabhupada and said, how do I get from bhava to prema? He said, you'll find that out later. When Prabhupada was asked, well, there are these new devotees who, want to be cowherd boys, Prabhupada said, that's very nice. So that's what I've seen with Prabhupada's dealings, that if people, from this detached philosophical point of view, wanted to discuss higher topics, he would be discouraging. And if it had some spontaneous attraction, he would be encouraging. Now, what we can do is, if people who are very immature want to talk about very high topics, is we can just remind them that Srila Prabhupada consistently mixed rasa with tattva. Consistently. He never, I don't know of any instance where he did not. Now, many of our acharyas didn't do that. So many of our acharyas wrote books on rasa with no tattva in it at all. None, zero, zippo. Not one word that Krishna is God anywhere in the book. So we have books by our acharyas like that. They're just describing leelas with no philosophy. And those books have now been thankfully translated and thankfully widely available. But the problem with having those books translated and widely available is that anybody can read them without having studied Srila Prabhupada's books. And therefore they can get into discussions of rasa without philosophy. So what I would encourage new people is that if we really want to advance without making a mistake, it's better to follow Prabhupada's example of always interweaving philosophical understanding into discussion of these things. And he always did that. My own personal belief is that one of the reasons that Srila Prabhupada was so successful at bringing Krishna consciousness to the entire world is that he did that. He didn't deny us from knowing these highest things. He produced Nectar of Devotion in 1969. In 1970, he was producing Krishna books. So it was practically, you know, one of the first things he did. I mean, teachings of Lord Chaitanya with, you know, Ramanand Sambad. And even in Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, even you can say Prabhupada did Bhagavad Gita in the beginning. There's so many higher topics woven into the purports. So Srila Prabhupada didn't deny us knowing about all these higher things of rasa, but balanced with tattva, balanced with philosophy, balanced with sound understanding, always. You listen to Prabhupada's lectures on like Radhastami or Govardhan Puja even. I mean, they're heavily philosophical. There's one Radhastami lecture where Prabhupada talks a lot about Varnashram, for goodness sakes. I mean, so I think you want to encourage people, you know, wow, this is wonderful. It's so wonderful that you have some attraction for Radha Krishna Lila. And it is wonderful. It actually is wonderful. How many of the 7 billion people on the planet have attraction for Radha Krishna Lila? I mean, that's a wonderful thing. Yeah, I would say it's violence to try to squelch that in a person in the name of you're not mature. I think that's actually violence to the person's spiritual life, but help them to become mature. You know, encourage them to read Krishna book, encourage them to read Nectar of Devotion, encourage them to read Chaitanya Charitamrita. You know, if you're interested in these things, read primarily Prabhupada's books. You can read the books of the Acharyas later. And even when you read the books of the Acharyas, like I still read Srila Prabhupada's books every day. It's not that, you know, well, now I'm just going to read Acharya's Leela books. And in fact, like with the infamous Gopi Baba Club, what made Srila Prabhupada furious was that they criticized Mother Yasoda. And they said that they weren't going to read the basic books anymore. You know, they were only going to read the portions about Madhurya. But especially when they criticized, well, we don't want to hear anything about Mother Yasoda. That was what made Prabhupada furious. So is that all right?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, well, I think we're at the end of our time. I want to just say to all of you that I am so grateful that the VIHE asked me to teach this. I had never before taught the Southern, Western, and Northern oceans of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. I didn't think I could. I didn't think I could understand them. I didn't think I could teach them. And I just want to really, 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 really thank the VIHE for pushing me to do this. It's been a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of time, but it's also been extremely nectarian. And what I'm hoping to do, and I'd like for all your blessings and good wishes, I'm in touch with Sutapa in Bhaktivedanta Manor and Gauranga Darshan at Govardhan Eco Village, Govardhan, Gauranga Darshan, I think. He just produced a study guide for the Eastern Ocean. And we're discussing coming out with a study, we're discussing coming out with a study guide for the whole Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which has not been done. So I'm discussing with him and with Sutapa about that, and also with the devotee Sri Yasoda from Australia. Any of you work with children would be familiar with her work. And she illustrated our children's book, Vidura's Banana Peels. So I'm in discussion with her about making a children's book of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, probably 2 versions, one for younger children, and then one for like 12 and up. So like a simplified Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu with lots and lots of pictures. Something, I become very inspired to bring Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu to the Gaudiya Vaishnava community. That Srila Prabhupada wanted to do this with his summary study. And I feel that this is something that would really help the devotees. And once we have these things done, then I want to petition the Board of Examiners to actually include all of the Nectar Devotion, not just the first part, in the Bhakti Shastra exams. And if they're not willing to do that, then the higher Shastra exams, but preferably Srila Prabhupada's desire to have the whole Nectar Devotion. Once we have study guides, now that we have all these PowerPoints, that can be done. So I'm asking for your blessings and good wishes for that. And again, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Yeah. Thank you very much for wonderful teaching.
Thank you, Mataji. Very nice class.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Hare
much.
Krishna Urmila Prabhu. This is Prashanta here. Anchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhyaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha. I have come to take your darshan today. I am the most unfortunate. All my students are learning and I'm not. I wasn't able to follow at all this seminar.
Please keep her encouraging her to give us more. Please.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, Prasanta. I think now I'm going to go and take breakfast. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Rupa Goswami Ki Jai.